Shalom, shalom. What up, everybody? Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Reading with SHILO. SHILO. And we are here for the next session of Reading with SHILO, where we're going to go ahead and jump into section 2 of chapter 9 of On the Real Side by Mr. Mel Watkins. Mr. Mel Watkins. We're going to see what he's talking about and see if there's anything, cut this off, anything that we can learn and grow from in this section. You know, definitely with some key points in the last chapter, our last section of this chapter section 1, which was a short reading, so to speak. So tonight in section 2, it should be I don't want to say a short one. It's not going to be a short one. It's going to be a pretty, I'll give it maybe an hour. We'll probably go the whole hour. We'll probably go the whole hour for section 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. Maybe an hour and a half. We'll see. We'll see how it goes and how it flows. And we're going to take it one word at a time, one page at a time, one section at a time, one chapter at a time, man. Line upon line, word upon word, until we get it understood, overstood, comprehended, finished, finito, finalized. So we're in chapter 9, the theater owners and the Apollo Theater. The theater owners and the Apollo Theater. And we're talking about the Sandman and the things they had set up for these different theaters. So I think it was the start of the scene. The start of the scene. So yeah, let's get it. Section 2. Make sure I got all my shit together. Highlighters, pencil, paper. Section 2. An essential part of that foundation was the classic comic routines created on the TOBA circuit, although one or more comedians inevitably claimed credit for developing the routines. In most instances, their origin is as obscure as many of the now forgotten performers who contributed to their slow evolution. John Spider, Bruce Mason's Open the Door Richard, and Miller and Lyle's Indefinite Talk Bits were extremely popular among Black audiences, but Pigmeat Markham's Here Come the Judge routine is best known because of its exposure on Rowan and Martin's Laugh during the late 60s, although some instant that it surfaced, although some insist that it surfaced in the early days of TOBA. Markham contends that the Judge evolved out of a routine that originated at Harlem's Alhambra Theater in 1928, in which he appeared as a magistrate. Now, Negroes in the audience loved it, and Markham wrote probably because the Judge, the pompous oppressor of the Negro in so many Southern towns, was being taken down a peg by the Negro comedian. I got the idea that I could turn the character into the full act, and so he did. As performed by Markham, the routine nearly always started with another comic announcing Markham's interest. Hear ye, court is in session, and here comes the judge. Here come the judge. In Amateur Night at the Apollo, Ralph Cooper claimed credit for the bit. Pigmeat became famous for that routine, written by yours truly, and offered a more elaborate version of the introduction. Let me see. Hold on. Excuse me. My lips dry. Hear ye, hear ye. The court of swing is now about ready to do its thing. Don't want no tears, don't want no jive. Above all things, don't want no lies. Our judge is hip, his boots are tall. He'll judge you jack big or small. So fall in line, his stuff is sweet. Peace, brothers, here's Judge Pigmeat. Pigmeat would then enter to a chorus of Here Come the Judge, Here Come the Judge, and convene his farcical court. He sometimes began with, The judge is higher than the Georgia pine. Everybody's gonna do some time this morning, or win more on it, or win more on it. The judge is mean this morning. I'm gonna start by giving myself 30 days next case. This was followed by one of several blackout bits featuring different comedians brought before the judge. One of the more popular turns on this routine followed Pigmeat's announcement that everybody would do some time. The lawyer. Your Honor, that's not fair. I object. Object? You object? You all the time coming in here and objecting me out of discussions or decisions. Why, man, I got all these years in my book and somebody's got to do them. Ain't gonna be me. Where's your first client? He's guilty. Judge, please, don't you remember me? I'm the man who introduced you to your wife. Introduced me to my wife. Life, you son of a gun. Whatever the origin of this routine, ultimately, Pigmeat Markham established it as his own. As he wrote in his autobiography, I added little bits and pieces down through the years and new jokes all the time, but the format is always the same. It became one of the most popular comedy routines on the TOBA tour and at the Apollo Theater. Nearly as popular was the go ahead and sing routine, which, according to Red Fox and Norma Miller, was developed by Henry Drake and John Rastus Moray in 1925. There were many adaptations by mainstream comedians, including a version involving the street vendor and his partner that surfaced in the Abbott and Costello film during the 40s. In the Drake and Moray original, two men decide to earn some money by having one sing on the street corner while the other collects money from pedestrians. When the first comic begins, however, a cop approaches and tells him he can't sing in the area. The singer's partner immediately intercedes, questioning the policeman's authority, but the singer assures the cop that he will stop. When the policeman leaves, the partner tells his friend, We've got a right to stand here and sing too. Ain't no flat foot gonna tell us what to do. You go ahead and sing. When he comes back, I'll talk to him. The singer starts in again, and the cop storms back. The cop. Wait a minute. Didn't I tell you not to sing on this corner? Yes, I know, officer, but my partner said it was all right. I don't care what your partner said. I said you can't sing here. That's the last time I'm going to tell you. If I have to come back here again, I'm going to take this Billy and put it upside your head. Then I'm going to take you to jail. As the cop walks away, the singer's partner yells, You ain't going to hit me in my head. The policeman returns and begins beating the singer over the head, stopping only when the singer pleads for mercy. But as the cop turns to walk away again, the partner says, You got a lot of nerve hitting a citizen. You ain't gonna hit me no more. The partner continues, agitating and signifying as the cop beats the singer off the stage and the lights go down. It was an exaggerated, comic interpretation of the familiar street gimmick of putting someone else in a trick by signifying on the third party, perhaps best seen in the folk ballad, The Signifying Monkey, and never failed to bring fouls or howls from the audience. Comedians on the TOBA circuit, like most funny men of the period, did not communicate directly with their audience. On Keith's vaudeville circuit, for example, performers were explicitly told not to address anyone in the audience. Stand up comedy and its unmediated dialogue with audiences, although it was foreshadowed by minstrel show stump speeches and the monologues of humorists such as Burt Williams and Will Rogers, did not become the principal form of stage humor until after the Depression. Come here. How can I help you? Are you done reading? No, sir. I'm just starting to read, sir. You're starting to read? Yes, sir. I am just starting to read. Are you done reading? Maybe. We'll see. Most black comedy avoided direct interaction with the 50s until the 50s. In Yes, I Can, Sammy Davis Jr. pointed out the limitations of that approach. Most Negro performers work in a cubicle, he wrote. He'd run on, sing 12 songs, dance, and do jokes, but not to people. The jokes weren't done like Milton Berle was doing them, to the audience. They were done between the men on stage, as if they didn't have the right to communicate with the people on front. The persistence of that approach, even after mainstream comedians such as Fred Allen, Jack Benny, and Milton Berle began experimenting with direct monologue humor, reflected black comics' second class status both on and off the stage. They were aware that, for many non blacks, their comic antics on stage were a true reflection of Negro behavior. A black performer who demanded a personal response would have transgressed a boundary that, by suggesting an equality intolerable to most non blacks. Still, on the TOBA circuit, a few black comedians did adapt to the stand up approach, despite their popularity among black patrons and the acclaim of their peers. They were shunned by white bookers and generally unknown outside of black cabarets and theaters. Now, Leonard Reed and Willie Bryant, both of whom frequently worked the Apollo, were two of the earliest. Now, Reed, who started in the show business as a Charleston dancer, was part of the team called Pen and Ink in the 20s, played the TOBA circuit with the Whitman Sisters show, worked with Bryant in a comedy act called Feet and Brains in the 30s, and later created a comedy act with boxing champ Joe Louis. Although he began doing stand-up in the musical comedy Hot and Sweet in the 30s, his comedy routines depended as much on slapstick and dance as on verbal wit. Now, Bryant, a perennial favorite as the Apollo emcee, let's see what that is. EMCEE. EMCEE. MC. As the Apollo MC, MC. MC. I wonder if that's what they just get the abbreviation, the MC for. The Apollo MC and comedian, MC. Let me see with it. My bad. A master of ceremonies. Bryant, a perennial favorite as the Apollo MC and comedian, was called the mayor of Harlem at one time, and because of his funny rap, was brains in the Reed Bryant team, excuse me. Along with Reed and Timmy Rogers, he appeared on the short-lived television show in the late 40s and hosted a series of variety shows, showcase films released in the 50s. Although Reed and Joe Louis took their act to Las Vegas after the champ retired, and both Reed and Bryant were well known in black entertainment circles, neither rose to mainstream stardom. Many performers who saw him insist that Alan Drew was the best of the early black stand-up comedians and among the best in all the show business. According to Honey Coles, he played black clubs from the late 20s to the 50s. And Leonard Reed claims that he didn't work theaters because his material was too blue. He was known as the Black Milton Berle, and according to Coles, was one of the best one-line comics that ever lived. He'd come on with a cigar in his hand and go right to the gags. He was so fast you laughed 3 gags later. You know you are still catching up with him. All the white comics, including Burl, came uptown to see him. He was the fastest comic alive, but in the 40s, he went back home to Chicago and finally became a policeman. He couldn't make any money. Now, Drew's predicament provides a clue to the nature of the black comedy both on and off the TBA circuit. It basically adhered to entrenched vaudeville and burlesque formats, presenting skits, brief blackout bits, and situational humor in which 2 or more comics, nearly always in blackface, worked and reworked established routines. Consequently, most black circuit comedians worked in virtual anonymity. Many routines were more famous than the comedians who performed them. And in addition to established situational routines, such as Here Come the Judge and Open the Door Richard, most often comedians worked in pairs and established a dialogue involving rapid responses to each other's pattern, as in the indefinite talk routine. Comics walked into the stage, chatting with one another, allowing audiences to overhear their routines. This setup characterized almost all of the early black circuit humor. A typical example of the following Tim Moore and Andrew Tribal routine. Moore: boy, you remember the other night when the rain came up? Well, yeah. Boy, that rain was a wing, wasn't it? Oh, man. Well, I was coming by that house, me and another Hawaiian boy, and we was walking along. Then I didn't want to get wet, so I said, I'm going in here and getting me a room. So I walked up there. I thought somebody was living in the house. Now, did you know? When I got up to the porch, I went to ring the doorbell, for I could touch the bell. The bell rung, for I could touch the bell rung by itself, and I ain't had no finger on it. The bell rung, and you ain't never touched it? Ain't touched it. Hey, that's magination. That's what you say. Boy, that house is haunted. There's a gang of ghosts hang out there. Boy, and I went to put my hand on the knob to open the door. Before I could touch the doorknob, the knob turned by itself, and the door flew open and nobody home. What kind of door was that? I can explain that. Maybe the wind blew it open. Boy, there's always a solution to every problem. You win the first point in a debate. The wind could have blown open the door. The wind blowed it open? Yeah, but there ain't no wind turning the knob. An early variation on these schemes or themes emerged in husband and wife teams who combined the comic pattern with dance. One of the most successful acts in the teens was the husband and wife team of String Beans and Sweetie B. According to the historians Marshall and Gene Stearns, they played only Negro theaters and their act was created off of, by, and for Negroes. One performance at the Glove Theater in Jacksonville, Florida, opened with Sweetie Mae sashaying onto the stage in a sexy gown and singing a blues tune as she deftly performed the Buck and Wing, one of the popular dances of the time. Then String Beans emerged wearing clownish attire, and as was popular amongst city dandies, on and off the stage, sporting a large diamond in one of his front teeth. The force of this presence was so powerful that the audience fell silent, After reeling off a tale about duping a gullible white policeman, String Beans moved to the piano and began one of the blues songs that usually initiated their comic verbal sparring. Listen, no good women's, stop kicking us men around, 'cause us men gonna be your iceberg and send you sinking down. As the routine continues, String Beans alternately comes up on as an arrogant dandy or a servile, pleading monkey man, a hen-pecked husband, or blues jargon. Wrenching laughter from both characterizations, even as he occasionally adds some acute social observations. White folks got all the monies. Colors got all the signs. Signs won't buy you nothing. Folks, you better change your mind. Now, combining songs, suggestive dance, and acerbic pattern, the bit offered a ritualized comic portrayal of some prominent themes in black male female relationships. Finally, having toyed humorously with some heavily laden, essentially black emotional issues, the pair always reached a kind of affectionate accommodation. It was one of the most popular acts on the TABA tour. Now, Butterbeans and Susie, a comedy team that had performed with String Beans and Sweet Mate, ultimately inherited their routine and became one of the most enduring black stage acts. Now, Jody Edwards started as a singer and dancer in the 1910 and met his partner Susie Hawthorne in 1916 when she was part of the chorus of the Smart Set show. They were married on stage the next year and developed a song and dance act later. Now, during the early 20s, after String Beans, his real name is variously given as Butler Mate and Bub LeMay, died, a promoter advised Edwards to adopt his funny costume and take the name Butterbeans. Edwards took his advice, and the team of Butterbeans and Susie was born. Now, shifting their emphasis to comedy, Butterbeans appeared on stage in tight pants, a boiler hat, and oversized shoes that were marked contrast to Susie's more stylish gowns. They usually began their act with a duet. Then, after she sang the blues tune, they might join in cakewalk and begin a comic pattern. Like String Beans and Sweetie Mate, their humor often revolved around the marital relationships, one of their most popular routines. Based on a song so ribald that it was spurned or spurned by Oakland Records, even though Columbia Records released Bessie Smith's version in 1933 with Susie's rendition of I Want a Hot Dog for My Roll. That sounds like that movie Sausage Party. Susie, in her usual flirtatious manner, belted out the lyrics. I want a hot dog without bread, you see, 'cause I carry my bread with me. I want it hot. I don't want it cold. I want it so it fit my roll. And while dancing suggestively, Butterbeans would add some quips as, my dog's never cold. Here's a dog that long and lean. The double entendres continued as Susie sang. I sure will be disgusted if I don't get my mustard. Don't want no excuse. It's got to have a lot of juice. Humorous send-ups of marital squabbles were also a part of their act, and they would often punctuate their song and dance routines with snappy quips and light-hearted signifying. One of their funniest and most popular songs, in fact, was a married man's a fool if he thinks his wife don't love nobody but him. And in another bit, Susie would warn the preening Butterbeans that he was about to be drafted, and while he was gone, she might leave him for a high yaller. He answers, if I come home and find you out, baby, you don't live here no more. A groundhog will deliver your mail. There'll be flowers and you won't smell them on the day you change your name. Baby, the verbal snipping was always a good fun. However, the inevitability the act ended on the humorous note. Now, Susie would sing a more mm, conciliatory tune, and Butterbeans always concluded the act with his hilarious comic dance, the heebie jeebies, sometimes called the itch. Now, as James Cross, Stump of Stump and Stumpy, describes the dance, he kept his hands in his pockets and looked like he was itching to death. And when he took his hands out of his pockets and started to scratch all around the beat, the audience flipped. Now, despite the often racy material, their act was among the most beloved on the circuit. There was ironically something ingenious or ingenuous and warm about it. The mock hostility and cutting quips aside, Susie was the plumpish, disalarming, attractive woman who exuded charm, and Butterbeans, even when most truculent and loud, projected the aura of cheerfulness and affection. Now, the humorous stage spats were inevitably seen as mock squabbles, and many of the most popular stage skits use material with strong sexual overtones. Now, Dewey Markham, in fact, acquired his stage name from such an act when he joined the Gonzale White Show, in the mid 20s, and eventually replaced Crackshot Hackley as the number one comic. Pig meat, a term with clear sexual connotation in blues lyrics, was the name of the character in the show. Markham played the part and, at the end of the skit, shouted, "I'm sweet Papa Pig Meat. I got the Jordan Rivers in my hips, and the woman is raving to be baptized." The name stuck, as Markham later said. Pig meat was my ticket to fame. In addition to the famous slapstick routines, Markham had a number of spicy burlesque theater bits that he regularly performed. In one routine, he shows up at the cheap hotel with a beautiful showgirl and asks for a room. The clerk tells him that he must be married to get a room there. The sleazy preacher, Markham's partner, Johnny Lee Long, happens by, and Markham quickly asks him to perform a ceremony. Brimming with anticipation, Pigmeat and his wife go off to their room. After they leave, a policeman enters, accuses the preacher of being a con man, and arrests him. The snooty clerk immediately calls the newlyweds back to the desk, where they appeared in nightclothes. "Clerk, you two have to get your clothes and get out of here. You ain't married." "Not married? But didn't the Reverend just marry us?" "He was no Reverend, just an old confidence man. The cop just took him away." "Then you mean we're not married?" "No, you've got to get out." "Well, it's too damn late now. Come on, gal." Frustrated but beyond being denied, Pigmeat rushes his wife off the stage. Another of the familiar suggestive routines performed on the circuit was a hospital bit in which Spider Bruce Mason often appeared. Now, Mason, who Honey Coles insisted was, along with Dusty Fletcher, the funniest of the Apollo Theater comedians in the early days, was the originator of the Open the Door Richard. But despite recognition by his peers, remained one of the most underrated of all the TOBA funny men. Now, working in blackface in the hospital routine, Mason plays an expectant father pacing up and down the corridor outside the maternity ward. The sound of a crying child is heard, and moments afterward, a nurse and an extremely light skinned doctor come out with two bundles. The nurse shouts, "Twins! Your wife has given birth to twins!" And anxiously, Mason rushes over and looks at the babies, then steps back as he sees something that disturbs him. How come one of them is so black and the other is so light? That's just the way they was born. Must come from the father. Yeah, well, I don't think I'm going to pay that bill for 200 I just got. Here's my half.
I almost done reading.
No, sir. I still have. Let me see. I got people watching me, man. People watching me reading. Where you supposed to be? Okay, well, go get there. I got 3 more pages left to go. Yes, sir. 3 more pages left to go. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This type of burlesque style humor appeared frequently on the TOBA tour. In many instances, the comedians who played the parts were interchangeable. Not only were such featured comics as Mark Ham, Mason, Crackshot Hackley, Dusty Fletcher, Leonard Reed, and Tim Moore called upon to perform the bits, but often band members, singers, and dancers were enlisted. Comedy may have been king in TOBA shows, but the throne was not restricted purely to comic royalty. Somehow or another, dancers always got into the sketches because they needed bodies. Now, Honey Coles recalled, you were either a messenger or some other minor character. That's how we learned comedy, filling in during the skits. Now, eventually, a little of that comedy technique rubs off on you. And at one point, a laugh was more important to me than getting a big hand on a dance step. Although Coles remained a featured tap dancer, he appeared in a comedy act with Bert Howell for a time. And the Coles and Atkins team often spiced their slick dance routine with comic patter. Often who starts as dancers ultimately becomes full-time comedians. Legendary stars Stephen Fetching, Eddie Rochester Anderson, and Bill Bojangles Robinson, for instance, all danced on the TOBA circuit before emerging as comedians in motion pictures and on radio and television. Similarly, black circuit funny men such as Leonard Reed, William Bryant, and Dusty Fletcher started out as dancers and used dance extensively in their comedy routines. In fact, Pygmy Markham claimed that he invented trucking, a comical dance that became a craze in Harlem during the 30s. And Mom's Mabley Shuffle was a popular part of her comedy act long before Muhammad Ali brought his own version to the boxing ring. On the TOBA tour, music and dance were nearly always intricately connected to comedy. Still, amid these stock routines and variety show embellishments, many acts developed distinctive bits that were purely comic. Boots, Boots Hope, for instance, worked in the venerable black comic tradition and was known as one of the TATOBA's funniest storytellers or liars, according to Count Basie, who could get out there and lie his butt off. When he got going on something that was really just outrageous anyway, you tried to look at it. He always used to interrupt himself and look right at the audience with his eyes wide open and say, I ain't lying. I ain't lying. Pigmeat Markham's, in addition to his Here Come the Judge routine, was known for a scared darky bit that was set in the graveyard. Now, Dusty Fletcher's stage character was nearly always inebriated, and his trademark line, yeah, it's me, and I'm drunk again, introduced a variety of routines. And Jackie Mabley, when she became known as Moms, traded on the portrayal of a slightly laborious, let's see what that is, or is laborious, or laborious. Lechereous. Laborious. Laborious or laborious. I think I want to say it's laborious. Laborious. Lecherous. Treated on the portrayal of a slightly lecherous older woman who regularly quipped. Lecherous. Having or showing excessive or offensive sexual desire. Lecherous. I wonder what's the synonym. What is the synonym? What is a synonym for lecherous? Lustful. Lewd. Salacious. Debauched. Desolate. Wanton. Loose. Fast. Impure. Unchaste. Intemperate. Dissipated. Degenerate. Sinful. Depraved. Crude. Goatish. Sensual. Libertine. Promiscuous. Carnal. Dirty. Filthy. Perverted. Coarse. Corrupt. Indecent. Randy. Horny. Raunchy. Pervy. Naughty. Licorice. Concupiscent. That's a lot of synonyms for that, for lecherous. Lecherous. And Jackie Mabley, when she became known as Moms, traded on the portrayal of a slightly lecherous older woman who regularly quipped, "An old man can't do nothing for me but bring me a message from a young one." Now, comedy teams, of course, dominated the TOBA, and as Flip Wilson suggested in this character's epigraph, the names were often as offbeat as the acts themselves. Step and Fetch It, Pete and Repeat, Moss and Fry, Chuck and Chuckles, Pen and Ink, Stump and Stumpy, Midnight and Daybreak, Buck and Bubbles, Crack Shot and Hunter, and Pot and Pans and Skillet. Pot, Pans, and Skillet are just a few of the more colorful named acts. Most of them worked some versions of the City Slicker and Underdog tandem pioneered by Flower Miller and Aubrey Lyles, but many had their own signature routines that became famous on the circuit. Moss and Fry, for instance, had a bit they called Dumb Talk, which featured a barrage of nonsensical, rapid-fire patter. Now, Leonard Reed and Joe Louis featured a unique slapstick boxing routine. Examples are obviously too numerous to mention here, but the Red Fox Encyclopedia of Black Humor lists over a dozen classic stage bits, and other sources suggest dozens more. Now, overall, the TOBA humor was characterized by its reliance on situational comedy, whether single acts, teams, or skits involving three or more players. TOBA acts, with such rare exceptions as Alan Drew, Wiley Bryant, and Moms Mailey, spurned monologues or stand-up comedy. Now, comedians worked within familiar, if sometimes far-fetched dramatic scenarios. It was an approach favored by most of the period's funny men. Comedy was also the central attraction in mainstream vaudeville, which was at the height of its popularity during the teens and 20s. Now, comedy on the TOBA circuit included little or no direct social or political commentary, whereas a few mainstream comedians, most notably Will Rogers, made it their specialty. Reportedly, one of the Rogers' earliest departures from his silent cowboy roping act was the offhand comment, "Swinging a rope, all right, if your necks ain't in it." The audience's response prompted Rogers to add more dialogue, and in years to come, he increasingly spiced his monologues with typical references. Much of his material was based on items from newspapers, and politicians were his favorite targets. When asked if he would run for public office, he commented, "There's already too many comedians in Washington. Competition will be taken keen for me." His disarming raw demeanor and homespun delivery apparently deflected criticism of the cutting satire underlying his humorous observations, and at the height of his career, even his principal targets were admirers. Now, as one might expect, however, popular black comedians rarely address political issues directly. It simply would not have been tolerated. Now, although the black inspired characters presented by the white interpreters on the Amos and Andy radio show regularly commented comically on politics, racial issues, on the other hand, were scrupulously avoided. Real black comedians carefully shunned references to the larger society. My bad, excuse me. We almost there. In an era when anti Negro sentiment and lynching were at their peak, publicly discarding the mask of naivety, revealing the aggressive aspect of their humor, and openly challenging tactic, assumptions about the nature of black comedy, indeed about black nature, on a circuit that not only regularly toured the Deep South, but also played theaters owned by outspoken racists, would have been suicidal. Now, although the classic bits and routines that have been recorded and passed along have few political references, one suspects that, like traveling bluesmen, TOBA comedians occasionally slanted their material for specific audiences and used alternative lines and extemporaneous remarks to reflect the black community's more assertive offstage humor. Now, while it is innocuous when compared to more recent barbs about the racist nature of the judicial system, among them Richard Pryor's quip, I went down there looking for justice, and that's what I found. Just us. Pigmeat Markham's Here Come the Judge routine was one of the more pungent bits of social satire seen on the TOBA circuit. The absence of social criticism and political satire is largely responsible for the criticism or the characterization of TOBA as simple or unsophisticated by many critics. Curiously, some black comedians have bolstered that elevation with their own assessments of African American humor. Now, Flower Noah Miller, for example, just prior to the Broadway opening of his Shuffle Along of 1933, offered the following opinion in William Randolph Hearst's New York, America. The simplicities of life, translated into terms of the human frailties, make for the best humor, which in a way explains why the Negro has such a remarkable sense of the comic. And the reason I say the Negro excels in humor because of the simplicities of life is not because the Negro can't understand humor we recognize as subtle, but because by nature he is unaffected. His problem, his habits, and his perspective are confined strictly to his own race. This too holds true of the Caucasian race, most of whom lead simple lives. That is why both races laugh at horseplay and slapstick. I maintain, however, that the Negro has a much better developed sense of humor and simplicities than his white brethren because he has not graduated to the more subtle types of comedy. Revealingly, the journalist conducted this interview qualified Miller's remarks with the caveat: Miller knows Negro humor. He knows, too, the kind of Negro humor Caucasian audiences appreciate best. Despite Miller's immense contribution to the development of the stage humor that broke away from minstrel buffoonery, the concept of black humor expressed above seems firmly mired in the mainstream view of Negro life. It is perhaps not surprising when one considers that Miller made his most important creative effects early in his careers. In the routines, they were widely imitated. Lyles died in 1932, and afterwards, Miller was often simply rehashing comic ideas that had been fresh a decade before. In addition, Miller had left the TOB circuit and the all black audiences that originally inspired his performances. Increasingly, he worked on the mainstream vaudeville and Broadway stage or in Hollywood motion pictures as a writer or performer. And his notions of what black audiences preferred in comedy and of the simplistic nature of black life were no doubt heavily influenced by the experience, by that experience. Ooh, man, excuse me. One more page left. We almost through. We almost through. In fact, with the exception of the few extraordinary comedians such as Will Rogers and Burt Williams and W.C. Fields, mainstream vaudeville humor was as simplistic as dependent on horseplay and slapstick as was TOBA humor. Joey Brown, Jimmy Durant, Abbott and Costello, and even Eddie Cantor relied on physical or low comedy techniques similar to those seen at black circuit theaters such as the Howard, Monogram, and the Lafayette. In this context, Miller's assessment provided a comforting message, one that incidentally cast the kind of bland frivolity that Shuffle Along of 1933 presented in a more favorable light. But if anyone had looked beyond the stage and screen and assessed the humor that by this time was appearing in literature as well as on the streets, the superficiality of Miller's remarks would have been revealed. Now, Miller was correct. However, in observing that, as far as stage humor was concerned, the problems, the habits, and the perspectives revealed by blacks were confined strictly to their own race. Still reading, sir. I still have one more page. That limitation realistically mirrored the actual predicament of the average Negro during the 20s. The overriding concern was survival and establishing an economic foothold. And despite the Harlem Renaissance's much ballyhooed Negrophilia, for most blacks to mainstream society was limited to jobs as menials, and appealing to whites for relief was seen largely as a futile endeavor. Now, common black folks were effectively excluded from the mainstream world, and despite the clamor created by intellectual and bourgeois blacks, generally ignored the white world as long as its activities did not directly affect them. They focused on their own segregated communities and frequently dismissed others' concerns with the simple remark, that's white folks' affairs. Now, comedy routines on a TOBA focused on that reality while avoiding underlying resentments. But with the stock market crash of 1929, white folks' affairs suddenly intruded in black life. In one sense, the poverty and deprivation that consumed the majority of Americans during the Depression were old hats to many African Americans. As blues slingers, Georgia Tom ironically quipped, I don't feel as depressed, for I didn't have a thing to start with. But as the situation worsened, the whites were fast in line to receive state and local assistance. Racial antagonism increased in some quarters. Still, despite cases of terrorism and intimidation, when blacks demanded their share of public assistance and such widely publicized incidents as the Scottsboro case, in many instances, the catastrophe brought white and black America closer together. In the South, for example, some biracial tenant farmer unions were formed, and President Roosevelt's New Deal policies, according to some historians, marked a real turning point in the trends of America's race relations. Soup lines were seldom segregated, and even when they were, an underlying sense of common distress eradicated much of the pretense of racial superiority. The Ku Klux Klan, whose terrorism and popularity had soared in the 20s, became transformed into a largely social organization. Downtrodden, hungry whites begging in Harlem, the south side of Chicago, and on Memphis's Beale Street as readily as blacks. Brother, can you spare a dime? Was most often a colorless refrain. Now, repercussions in the entertainment world were also immediately felt. Big time vaudeville, already severely strained by network radio and introduction of sound movies, expired. Diminishing patronage compelled theater owners to close or eliminate more expensive live entertainment and turn to motion pictures. Now, in 1932, New York City's Palace Theater, the jewel of the mainstream vaudeville, closed its doors. Black circuit vaudeville had succumbed even earlier, and black entrepreneur Sherman S. Dudley was forced to sell his theater and booking agency in 1929. And within the next 3 years, although some theaters remained open, the TBA network fell to ruin. The nation reeled as it experienced its most severe test since the Civil War. African Americans, devastated more than any other segment of society, joined with others in seeking a political solution to the problem. Now, black participation in the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt marked the end of the African American regression allegiance to the party of Lincoln and reflected an assertive attitude towards political participation that would continue escalating until the civil rights movement and voter registration drives in the 60s. But the Depression also unleashed a long smoldering resentment of militancy that blacks had previously suppressed. In 1935, after reports that the black youth had been killed by a white merchant for allegedly stealing a knife, Harlem citizens went on a rampage. The main targets were the white owned stores dotting 7th Avenue and 125th Street. Now, when the violence and looting subsided, 200 stores had been wrecked. It was probably the first black initiated riot in American history since emancipation and marked a distinct shift away from the predominantly passive acceptance of mainstream oppression. As Ralph Cooper noted, the so called riots helped end the grand illusion that Harlem was full of happy go lucky blacks, too busy singing and dancing and strutting to want a slice of the American pie. The hardships of the Depression had elicited an unmistakably aggressive reaction to social injustices. And the tolerance threshold had been reached, and increasingly black diffidence and indirect expression of discontent would give way to overt disdain and outspoken criticism of racial inequities and white pretense of fair treatment. Now, as entertainers struggled to find work in cabarets, motion pictures, and those theaters still showcasing black acts, comedians began reflecting the black community's more assertive mood. And that was the end of section 2. Let me see what section 3 got. 1, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm gonna say 8. 8 pages. There's 8 pages in section 3. So I'm gonna leave section 3 alone because section 3, according to what was read tonight, which is about 8 pages, it took me an hour. So section 3 is going to be about another hour, and I don't want to go for the 2-hour live tonight. Not tonight, but that was section 2. Let me see. Yeah, section 3, and then we'll be into chapter 10. Man, we are on the downslope of this book. The downslope. Excuse me. That sleep monster was busting me up towards the end. I think it's 13 chapters in here. I'm trying to see. I'm trying to see if it's 13 chapters because I just got to the afterward. Yeah, 13 chapters, and then the afterward is long. I don't think I'm gonna read the notes. I do not think I'm gonna read the notes. But the afterward for sure. It has bibliographies, selected bibliographies, picture credits, indexed, which I'm not gonna read any of that. So yeah, we don't have much. We got about this much right here. This much left to finish the book. This is what's left for chapter to get to chapter 10, and then from chapter 10 to chapter 13 and the afterward. It's not that much, man. It's not that much. We almost done. We are almost done, man. I'm gonna put another mark on the back of this thing. I'm gonna etch it in, and we're gonna continue to see what we have learned or what we can learn from Mr. Mel Watkins in On the Real Side, a history of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock. And so far, it is definitely a lot of information on, different people who paved the way from slavery times, or that can be remembered around slavery times till the time of Chris Rock, that paved the way for the comedians, the dancers, even the record labels that we have today, the television stations that we have today, the radio stations that we have today, the intricate part that was played by the so-called slaves, the blacks, the inferior race of this country, the contributions that they have made, to push comedy to where it is today, what it is today. Even had them laughing back then in slavery days. Man, that's a I want to say that's a big task. That's a big task, a heavy load to carry right there. But sometimes they say that you have to laugh to keep from crying. So maybe the laughter is in the book they're always wondering, and talking about the humor. Where does this laughter come from? But maybe it's the laughter of trying to keep their heads up that makes them laugh so hard. Because it's some terrible shit that they going through. So like I said, gotta laugh to not cry. But so far so good. Like I said, we still pushing. We done made it through the front of the book, the majority of the book. We're on the down slope. We only have really 3 chapters and an afterward. 3 chapters and an afterward left to read. And then on to medical apartheid. And we'll see what that one's talking about. That one's gonna be I assume that it's gonna be a very graphic book. A very graphic book on the many experiments that was done to the black women to further the medical field. So I'm ready to see. I'm ready to see what that's about. But I don't know about y'all. Getting cool down here. It's cool down here. So I hope y'all are ready for this weather to change. Be careful. This is when the sicknesses start to come. So hey, get your teas, your vitamin C's and whatever else that you use ready. Your soups. Get all that ready. So that way, you could be prepared for the season. And let's keep pushing. Like, comment, subscribe, Tell your people. You know, let me know what you learned, what you have learned, or any comments, critiques, whatever. Put in a comment, man. Until next time. Shalom, everybody.